Ilya Igorevich Rogachev. I had the honor to visit Ambassador Rogachev twice at his residence and to listen. Ambassador, can I ask you to mute the mic until we ask you to unmute it? Thank you. I had the honor to visit the ambassador twice, as I've said, and it was truly an eye-opener to hear from him what the situation is in Russia, and specifically with regards to the limited military operations in the Ukraine, the reasons why the Russian president decided on those operations, the objectives of those operations, and the international implications that came from actions also by the imperialists and specifically those of NATO in terms of encroachment onto the territory of the Federal Russian Republic. But before we move on to that discussion, which is going to be the bulk of tonight's discussion, I would like to start with a very short report back on the Ramaphosa Must Go campaign. Those who are regular listeners will recall that 2 Twitter spaces ago, we had a discussion about the Phala Phala debacle and the criminality of what happened there. There was an agreement that we can't just be a talk shop, that there had to be some further action taken. On that basis, meetings have taken place. We are well on the way to now establish a broad base of citizens' power and mobilization with a call, Ramaphosa must go. That campaign is also going to receive financial support from a broad sector of our society through citizens' contributions as seed money. We have agreed that an account will be opened, a trust account, which will be under strict control from a small board, and that account will consistently be managed in a transparent way, and that there will be accountability. Unfortunately, last Tuesday, yesterday, we were supposed to meet to finalize the issues around the account, but those of you who have followed the news around the very farcical COVID-19 case that I had to deal with in the Escort Magistrates Court, which fortunately was dismissed by the magistrate, will understand that after that dismissal, I had to meet with attorneys, and also one of those advocates that I had to engage with was Advocate Dalian Mpofu, in order to now prepare for legal action against the state for wrongful arrest and also for malicious prosecution. So we've decided to shift the meeting that we were to have yesterday to Thursday. And I want to assure you that on coming Sunday, which is the next Twitter Spaces on the 3rd of July, we will have some very interesting announcements, including also a target date that we are working towards for a mass protest action, where we want to have literally thousands of people out on the streets under this slogan, hashtag Ramaphosa must go. And while I mention the slogan, let me ask all of us to use this slogan exclusively. Let's not make variations of the slogan. Let's not say at one point, Cyril Ramaphosa must go, and at another point, Ramaphosa must fall, and so forth. If we are consistent, if we use only this one slogan with the hashtag Ramaphosa must go, the likelihood that it will trend, that it will get very high up on the trending list is much better. So let us be media and social media savvy and simply use the slogan Ramaphosa must go. I'm looking out for Comrade Nkosishentsha Shezi, who is specifically working on a campaign in KwaZulu-Natal. I've asked him to join us early on so that I can give him an opportunity to give a report on that campaign. Unfortunately, I do not yet see him here in our Twitter space of tonight. If he comes in later, I will give him an opportunity at the end of our engagement to give that report back. But what I can say is that Comrade Shezi is planning a civil society and community march. He has also, as you may all know, similar to what I've done, laid charges at his local police station against Cyril Ramaphosa. Those charges included also charges of gender-based violence. He was concerned that he had not yet received a case number from the South African Police Service. And on Monday afternoon, after I appeared in my court case in Escourt, and after the matter was dismissed by the magistrate, as I've said, I went with Comrade Shezi to the Durban Central Police Station to file another letter of complaint that the police are dragging their feet. We will continue to push for the police to take action. We will continue to call on you as participants in this Twitter space and the broad citizenry to please continue to lay charges against President Cyril Ramaphosa, to go to your local police stations, to write to your representatives in your provincial legislatures and also in the National Assembly, and demand that the law must take its course, that there can't be any preferential treatment, and that President Ramaphosa must be held accountable for what has already become known about the Phala Phala farm scandal. And in that process, that he must be charged, and that those charges must reflect the reality of what had already been revealed about the criminality that take place at his Phala Phala farm, and also in the wake of it, including also, as we have gathered and discussed last time, also international crimes. Unfortunately, my co-host, Tsepa Kadima, is unable to join us for the first hour because he's out of the country, he's traveling. But he sent me a message that he will try to join us at about 7:45, 8 o'clock. And when he comes in, I will then also welcome him and allow him, as usual, to make his input. It is now my great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Rogachev. As I've said, I have gotten to know Ambassador Rogachev as someone who is more than capable to articulate the policy positions and decisions of the Federal Republic of Russia. I've also gotten to know Ambassador Rogachev as someone who has a deep understanding of Russia's position within the international community, and he can explain very, very clearly the reasons for the decision for the limited military operation into Ukraine. And also, and I would like Ambassador Rogachev, when he started with this input, to also give us also his comments about the incredible wave of media propaganda that has been unleashed against Russia, the lies that have been told about the actions that are taking place in the Ukraine, and the deep concern that all of us should have about Russophobia and the hatred against Russians that are being stoked on. All of these issues, myself and some other members of the African National Congress and concerned citizens have discussed with Ambassador Rogachev during engagements with him. Ambassador, as I've said earlier, it is truly An honor to have you on this In My Crosshairs Twitter space. We are looking forward to your input. We have listened to a conversation that you had a while ago on Newsroom Africa with Thabo Mdluli, and truly that was insightful, but I think the only regret we had was that there was not enough time for you to go into more and necessary detail about the situation as it is unfolding in the Ukraine, and specifically also the position of Russia. It is now, therefore, my pleasure to hand the mic over to Ambassador Rogachev. I can request you, Ambassador, to now unmute the mic, and then we are all ears to hear from you and what you want to share with us. The mic is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Niehaus. Good evening, all. Thank you very much for this valuable opportunity to explain some things to a wide audience. It is really valuable to us as exactly as you mentioned, there are so many lies about what's going on, and for certain reasons, of course. Now, I would give that Western propaganda and its gimmicks, which are repeated, unfortunately, by most of South African media. Their goal is to make viewers, listeners, to react emotionally to a certain picture, which is being provided by written media, by electronic media, shown on TV screen. And you often hear comments like trying to make you believe that this is what horrible Russians doing horrible things, committing horrible crimes. Poor Ukrainians suffer, and the homes are destroyed, and of course maternity hospitals, so this is their favorite subject matter, are destroyed, and so on and so forth. Yes, and many people do react emotionally, and another part of the goal is to make audience not to think about what has led to this situation, to the special military operation conducted by part of the Russian military in the territory of Ukraine, and insisting that there are no reasons for war in Ukraine, insisting that this aggression is unjustified, that invasion is carried out with the utmost brutality, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, I should begin by saying that we Russians also take this event emotionally, and we are not happy with it. It is a bad thing. The war is not nice, never, ever. And we still think of Ukrainians as of other brotherly people, and many people in Russia react to this quite emotionally and negatively. But most of Russians, at least, understand the causes and reasons for this. And of course, there are many of them. It is not conducted without any reasons. I mean, many political commentators that now blame Russia for everything and about everything used to describe President Putin as a chess grandmaster who calculates his moves beforehand till the very end of the game, and that he is wise and he is cold-blooded and he has his reasons, of course, and so on. Now the same people, the same media, the same governments, spokespersons, and so on, say that there are no reasons for this special military operation. Don't you think there is a logical gap here? That these people were wrong either then or they are wrong now? And of course, I can assure you that they are wrong now. They are lying now, most of them. They are doing it knowingly, with realizing that this is not the case, that this is not unjustified, that this is not without reasons. The decision to begin this operation was dictated by many factors that Russian leadership had to take into account, and circumstances were very difficult, and this is why addressing Russian people early in the morning of the 24th of February this year, announcing the beginning of this limited military operation, President Putin called it a very hard decision to take. But he also mentioned that it was inevitable, that Russia was compelled to do this, that Russia was left with no other choice. So what did he mean exactly? Of course, he meant some reasons and some grounds for this. The goals of the operation that he mentioned were denazification of Ukraine and demilitarization of the country. Human civilization has a precedent of denazification. Nazi Germany, after the victory over Nazism and fascism in the Second World War. And demilitarization, of course, is somewhat broader, but also pretty much comprehensible concept, I think. Now, the immediate reason to begin this operation was to end the war and the sufferings of the almost 6 million people of Donbas region. Donbas is a geographic notion, and administratively it consists of two eastern Ukrainian regions with the centers in Donetsk city and Lugansk city. These Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics proclaimed independence from Ukraine, and it was recognized by the Russian Federation on the 21st of February, and treaties on cooperation and assistance was concluded and ratified between Russia and these two republics. That's the legal aspect of that situation. And again, the goal was to put an end of Ukrainian military and Nazi formations shelling and attacking these two Eastern Ukrainian regions, which began in 2014. In February 2014, when unconstitutional coup d'etat happened in Kiev, and ultranationalists and neo-Nazis basically came to power, or at least that was the time when they began exerting the overall control and influence on the Ukrainian government, including parliament. These new authorities, unconstitutional authorities in Kiev, began with enacting several laws and executive acts limiting the use of Russian language and the use of the rights of the Russian-speaking population in general, which is predominant in eastern and southern areas of Ukraine. It is historically so, as historically Ukraine was what is now just the center and the west of this country. And Russian-speaking population, mostly Russian-speaking population of these regions, disagreed with this and protested. The protests were peaceful at that time, but it all began early in May in the city of Odessa, when peaceful protesters were driven by Nazi fighters sent on several trains, passenger trains from Kiev, from central and western regions of Ukraine. So they were driven into a building, the so-called trade union's house, that was torched. And 42 of the protesters were burnt alive, and many others trying to escape the fire were jumping off the windows, and the Nazi crowd rushed to finish them. So many, of course, people were very impressed with that. They were scared. They revolted against such treatment. And I should add that since then, in these 8 years, this crime was not investigated and nobody was brought to justice, despite dozens of videos that were taken on the spot by many people and the presence of Kiev police, Ukrainian police on the spot. So in many regions in the south and in the east of the country, people disagreed with that and protested against these actions of new authorities in Kiev. And this is how the situation in some of them degenerated. In particular, it happened in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions. Luckily, Crimeans isolated themselves on their peninsula and had time to conduct a referendum, according to which they joined Russia very early. And thus, they saved themselves from this ultra-nationalist push from Kiev. But in the east of Ukraine, the situation degenerated to the situation of the civil conflict, civil war. And since then, since 2014, 2015, when the active phase of hostilities was over, it's been just a latent conflict with though regular shelling and bombing by Ukrainian military of the civilian infrastructure and civilian population, and there is no other population, and there is no other people in Donetsk and Lugansk, as they have only their own militia, not modern armies. So for all these 8 years, shelling and bombing, killings of civilians in these two eastern republics was going on. And of course, Western-controlled media, mainstream media, so to speak, were not reporting that because that was okay, it was just Russians. Of course, I can tell you very tearful stories, about 150 children, little kids being killed in Donetsk and Lugansk. There are monuments to them. There is a memorial for them, where guests, people traveling to these places are usually brought. It is already a tradition to attend this Alley of Angels, as people in Donetsk call them, and so on. But the fact is that killings were going on. Ukrainian military kept killing their own civilian population, and that should have been stopped someday. And we are about to finish that. The problem is that while militia of Donetsk and Lugansk and Russian military push farther from the territories, from these cities, the line of the division between these republics and the rest of Ukraine, the Ukrainian military started receiving and using longer range artillery from NATO countries, from the Western supporters, and they still are capable of shelling civilian areas in the rear of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. They are shelling areas and killing civilians, and this does not have any military impact, except that it is, of course, calculated to produce certain psychological effect, to scare population, and basically it's an act of vengeance against the civilians, as they are losing on the battlefield. Besides that, we know and we knew, and again, that was not reported by the Western media, that Ukrainian government was preparing an attack, a full-blown attack against the east of the country, against Lugansk and Donetsk, and the military buildup was conducted with this view. Ukrainian military, for all these 8 years, has been trained and equipped according to NATO standards and by NATO instructors. And so they finished the 2021 with about 260, 270,000 men, well trained and very well equipped, and about 160 and to 170,000 of them were concentrated in the east of the country. And obviously, an attack was imminent. Now, it was the opinion by our experts, based on some intel perhaps, that the attack by a Ukrainian army on Donetsk and Lugansk regions was supposed to happen on the 25th of February. Now, with all the documents that Russian military have captured on the battlefield, we know that it was scheduled for the 8th of March. And the task of the Russian military was to preempt this attack. Again, Russian military buildup began last year in the fall, and it was very loudly reported by the Western media. Unlike the Ukrainian military buildup, nobody talked about them amassing 160,000 troops on the border with Donetsk and Lugansk. So this limited military operation basically preempted an attack by Ukrainian military on its own population in the east of the country. By the way, by this time, by already this year, a lot of people in the east of Ukraine asked for Russian citizenship and received it. So several hundred of thousands of them have become Russian citizens, and Russian Federation had a duty to defend them, to protect them. This is according to modern international law. Responsibility to protect. I should mention again that that was a preemptive strike, a limited military operation, as only part of the Russian army participates in it. The goals are limited. Everything you hear about terrible atrocities, bombing of civilian populated areas, cities, destructions of towns, and so on, is false, or fakes, or staged. This is not a full-blown war. We do not use the most destructive weapons. Russian military do their best to avoid civilian casualties. They never bomb and they never attack civilian infrastructure. And yes, there is a certain number of casualties, but they are inevitable to the extent that Ukrainian military use very widely civilian population as human shields. You can deduct it from what you hear and learn. Sorry?
Sorry, Ambassador Sandile, your mic, you must really make sure that it's muted. Ne? Thanks. Ambassador, you can proceed.
Yes, thank you. The prisoner of war that are now in small parts are in Russia of Ukrainian military. They testify that the tactics of using civilians as human shield, the tactics of bringing the fight to the cities, to the populated localities, was taught to them by NATO instructors. So what you can see is that Ukrainian military and Nazi formations, they avoid fighting Russian military in the open areas. They concentrate their defenses in the cities. It is in Kharkov, in Nikolaev, in Lysychansk, in Severodonetsk, and some other localities, in Mariupol, as it was the case earlier, and so on. They premeditately do this. Those are not the stories that you hear on the Western media, that Russians disagree and do not coordinate corridors, so-called humanitarian corridors, to let civilians out, that Russians blocked civilians on Azovstal steel mill in Mariupol, that now hundreds of civilians are blocked in the plant of Azot in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. There are other industrial installations where presumably civilians hide. To the opposite, civilians are kept there and not let go by Ukrainian military and the Nazis. Hundreds and thousands of them are used as human shields. Russian military open humanitarian corridors daily, but nobody or almost nobody can use them. And this is the tactics that is very widely used along the whole of the front line. In the bigger cities like in Kharkov and in others, one can see very often shown on TV pictures of high rises, multi-story buildings, apartment buildings, which are burned on the top. And the narrative, the comments are that horrible Russians bombing civilian areas, and they are burning down and destroying these apartment towers and so on. The truth is that the most widely used tactics by Ukrainian military is to make gun positions on top of the high rises. They place even heavy equipment there. And so they take the upper floors of the buildings and they use them as gun positions for anti-aircraft defense equipment in particular. But they keep residents in the lower floors of the buildings. They simply lock them and they do not let them leave their apartments. Knowing this, Russian military attack only the upper floors. And usually when you see such buildings with 2 or 3 upper floors burnt out or the rooftops destroyed and intact in with their lower floors, this is the admirably precise work of the Russian military, who have to fight enemy even in such situations. Let me remind you that according to international humanitarian law, when the military equipment is placed at a civilian site, be it a school, kindergarten, or maternity hospital, this object becomes a legitimate military target. But still, Russian military try to do their best and to go around such places whenever it is possible. Otherwise, what you see on TV screens, the photos printed in the newspapers, 80 to 90% of those are fakes. This is really a fake factory. I mean, Ukrainians are losing on the ground, but they are very well supported by the Western PR, propaganda, and staging experts. And all of them, they really doing it with great devotion. I can tell you about a number of fakes that almost all of you have heard of. In particular, let's begin in chronological order, perhaps. It was a totally fake story about courageous defenders of Zmiyny Island or Snake Island, refusing to surrender to a Russian Navy ship and paying the ultimate price for that. President Zelensky awarded them with title of Heroes of Ukraine post-mortem. Later, though, it turned out that the entire Ukrainian garrison on the island stayed alive, having surrendered to Russian troops. And they were taken on a board of a Russian Navy. And in order to not to debunk by them staying alive of this legend, Ukrainian military attacked the ship on board of which these 80-something, I think, Ukrainian military were traveling. But no one bothered to rewrite the legend. And in Ukraine, one can still come across post stamps praising this patriotic story. This story was disseminated so widely, and no media, I never heard of any, presented any refutation of it or apologies to either Russian side or Ukrainian side. I mean, that was a horrible information for the families and friends of those Ukrainian military who, as they knew, were stationed on the Snake Island. Another fake is the famous ace, the ghost of Kiev, who allegedly struck fear into Russian air forces, having downed dozens of Russian jets. The fact is that his heroic dogfights were illustrated with the footage of video games or old footage from the web. And now it doesn't seem to disturb anyone. Later, even Western journalists had to acknowledge that it had been a made-up story. Yet, this ghost legend is still repeated from time to time in Western media and unfortunately in South African media as well. Now, I would say that video clips is a separate topic in all this propaganda effort. So many staged and fake video clips were disseminated, in particular pretending that buildings in Kiev were destroyed or in Kharkov were destroyed. And very often, these buildings, the footage was made in Donbass. So those were the buildings in Donetsk and Lugansk destroyed by Ukrainian military. And it was presented as civilian infrastructure destroyed by Russian troops elsewhere. But who can distinguish? Who can tell a building, modern building in Donetsk from same standard building in Kiev? Only very few people who live there. And I have to admit that Ukrainians realized very quickly that in the digital era, the developments that are presented by the media are more important than the real developments on the ground. And they use it for many purposes, in particular to I would say, extort more assistance from the West and to support the morality of their troops, which is now at a very low point. But they tried to make use at a certain point in time of the voluntary retreat of Russian troops from the Kiev and Chernihiv regions in the north of Ukraine. And Ukrainian Western propaganda experts carried out a provocation in Bucha, yet another instance that should sound familiar to many of you. And it was really monstrous by both scale and performance. Many people believe in it still, though it was debunked by Western journalists themselves. And many experts voiced their doubts, which is already a very courageous thing to do in the modern anti-Russian atmosphere in the West. Many people pointed out that bodies were lying on both sides of the street in this village, presumably killed by shelling, by artillery fire, while even the windows, the glass in the windows of the houses near which they were lying were intact. And many things like that, many discrepancies like that were indicated by many people. After all, there was a footage disseminated by the Russian Ministry of Defense, an interview with the mayor of this village, which was taken one day earlier than the whole incident happened, and it was everything was okay with him. He never mentioned that the village was destroyed. He never mentioned bodies lying on the streets of it. So apparently they were brought from other places. Many of them, as testimony, several testimonies have it, were carrying the traces of shrapnel wounds. And this kind of ammunition is not used by the Russian army. and they were buried in mass graves by the military and a few volunteers, without any relatives coming to the procession, simply for the fact that they were not, from the people that were buried, were not locals. They were brought from other localities. But as far as Western military deliveries, Bucha was a game changer. And that was exactly what Ukrainian authorities needed and wanted. I can go on and tell you about the stories of maternity hospital allegedly destroyed by Russian shelling in Mariupol, and with the two pregnant women, walking around in disarray and watching helplessly the rubble of the building. Now, these two pregnant women happened to be one local blogger. She was pregnant at that time. She was recognized by the locals, though she changed clothes and was wearing different mascara in the two episodes that were videotaped. And I can tell you that since then she gave birth to a healthy child, and they were staying for a while in Donetsk itself. So please do not get easily disinformed and misled, because taking these horrible pictures of human suffering just emotionally, without realizing that there are other reasons for what's going on, is exactly what Western media would like you to believe in. As for other reasons, of course, I said that protecting people in Donbass was an immediate reason, but there is a slew of other reasons. And they pertain mostly, they belong to the area of strategic security interests of the Russian Federation. And there are several of them that are worth mentioning to me. In particular, number one is that since the breakup of the USSR, since 1991, Ukraine declared its will to join NATO. And we negotiated with Ukrainians for many years and even decades since then, trying to convince them that they do not really want it, they do not need it. There are examples of such countries as Austria, Sweden, Finland, which is no more, which are no more examples. But they, for decades, they enjoyed peaceful coexistence with the USSR, with the Russian Federation. They enjoyed all the benefits of economic cooperation, of human contacts with our country, and they were fine with it. But there were and there are some interests in the West to move NATO troops closer and closer to the borders of Russian Federation, and finally to have them stationed right on the borders, like in the Baltic republics and in Ukraine in particular. We know that Ukraine was moving in this direction, but even without formal membership in NATO, the territory of Ukraine has been already exploited in the military interests of NATO countries. NATO troops were there NATO instructors, experts on certain types of arms were there on quasi-permanent basis, or as it's called, rotational permanent basis. We know that Navy bases were supposed to appear, and some activities about constructing them have begun, in particular in Odessa, but also in another locality. We know that there were plans to deploy some ground troops from the USA, and if the question is just of timing, certainly with time, different types of arms that are in the NATO armies would appear there, like cruise missiles. Now, the flight time from the Ukrainian territory, eastern Ukrainian regions to Moscow is 5 minutes. This is not enough to deploy or activate an effective anti-missile defense. We indicated to Ukrainian colleagues, we indicated to our former Western partners that this is a red line. We will not accept that. But Ukraine was moving there. Since 1991, there were 4, or some experts count 5, waves of NATO expansion to the east, despite the promise not to expand. And this is historical proven fact that there was a promise not to move NATO to the east. It is now useless to debate this issue. It is really proven. Being a young diplomat, I remember myself, I've read minutes of the meetings where different high-ranking Western officials gave these promises. It is all on the paper. So Ukraine, formally or unofficially, was about to become a NATO member country, with all the consequences for Russia in this regard. And of course, I don't have to explain to this audience that NATO is not a defensive bloc. It is an aggressive military alliance which seeks to spread its influence to the new regions of the world. And now it's not only China, Eastern Asia, but also Southeastern Asia, which is proclaimed the area of NATO interests. Besides that, in the last year or so, year and a half, President Zelensky and other Ukrainian leaders started talking about reacquiring of nuclear weapons. Now, with this very heavy neo-Nazi and ultranationalist influence in this government, the looming perspective became rather troublesome. How about nuclear weapons in the arms in the hands of Nazi regime? This is really a scary perspective. Besides that, we knew about several biological laboratories developed on different sites in Ukraine. But what our troops have found out is that there were far more of them than we thought initially. Now, I think there is information about at least 20 of such biolabs located in different areas that conducted research in the interests of Pentagon. It was all sort of a covert activity. It was all sponsored by US. The areas of research are actually quite scary because what we know now is that they were trying to develop biological weapons which would attack a certain set of genes. So it should have been ethnically oriented, ethnically targeted biological weapon. You can have a lot of information about that on the site of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Russia have raised this issue twice in the United Nations. We called for special meetings of the UN Security Council. We presented there some evidence telling about the activities that research that has been carried out in these biolabs. But of course, our Western former partners having majority in almost every international organization procedurally can make these efforts invalid. But I personally think that the world will come back to this issue. Many people will hear about these biolabs. They do exist in many other places, in particular in Africa. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of them all over the world. And governments grossly underestimate the danger that the threat that they actually represent. But we will come back to this, I'm pretty much sure, when we finish the special military operation in Ukraine. We will do more in order to bring the world's attention to this threat. So there are other things, of course, to be mentioned, but probably I should stop here, and maybe if you think it is appropriate to take questions, few questions from the audience.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thanks for the very comprehensive briefing that you've given us. I'm definitely going to allow for a number of questions. Perhaps we should do it in the following way, that we first of all ask the participants who come in now to ask questions, and then after about 5 or 6 of those inputs with regards to questions, we will then give you an opportunity to respond to those. After that, we will then open in the usual fashion to the comments and discussion that we have on this Twitter space. I would like to indulge your patience, Ambassador, and please ask you to stay as long as possible, if possible, for the duration of this Twitter space conversation, so that at the end, we can also grant you the opportunity to then make concluding remarks as we usually do. I couldn't help, Ambassador, but to remember one very strange footage that I saw, which was on some of the international mainstream media. It was supposedly of a scene of devastation and of people who have been killed by what was called indiscriminate bombings. But as you pointed out, in some of these scenes, the windows of the shop fronts are not broken. What didn't pass the attention of the cameramen and women and the editors of that program was that while they were busy talking to the anchor person, some of those dead people decided that they had enough of lying on the ground and started getting up and walking away. So we saw a miracle of the resurrection of the dead. Now, there are many of these examples of the kind of propaganda that we are faced with through Western media. Of course, and you pointed out, The Western media did not report to us the terrible atrocities that happened in 2014 and during that period in the Donbas region. But today they cannot get enough to try and describe atrocities to the Russian military operation in Ukraine. I also just want to make one comment about South Africa. I think we as South Africans need to understand the very special relationship that we have with Russia, of course also through the incredible support that the old Soviet Union gave to our anti-apartheid struggle. There was a short video clip making the rounds on WhatsApp groups and on social media a while ago. It was from the Sputnik program and George Galloway talking about the kind of support that we as South Africans received from Russia, and that it was in fact unsurpassed compared to the manner in which Western nations were betraying us, continuing to give support to the old apartheid regime, and throughout, even when they nominally introduced sanctions, continued to economically also support the apartheid system. So we've got a huge sense of debt towards the Russian people and for the incredible support that you have given to us. As South Africans, I think many of us feel that our government can do more in order to support Russia in this context. But I will not ask you, Ambassador, to comment on that for diplomatic reasons. At the same time, we also feel that South Africa's involvement within BRICS, especially its seemingly deteriorating and limited involvement in BRICS during the last few years, especially under the current administration, is reason for concern. But let me not continue to make any further input, and let me allow a number of those who have requested to speak to come in. Remember, we have agreed that we will, for the next 5 or 6 inputs from you, participants, ask you to ask questions of clarification, and then we will come back to Ambassador Rogachev and provide him an opportunity to respond to those questions. Harold Furwood, I'm giving the mic to you.
Good evening, Comrade Carl. Thank you for this opportunity to speak, and to the listeners. It's quite inspired of you to have the Russian ambassador here to be able to speak and engage us on the Russian government's and its people's position and background to the military operation in the Ukraine. However, I wish to just, I'm sure that other speakers will engage on more of the details of the military operation, but I wish to take it just quickly to a more higher level on regard to and the recent speeches by President Putin referring to the multipolar world and the vision that Russian and he's trying to bring forth for the world and mankind. Yes, because I'm not sure if the ambassador is acquainted or has knowledge of, possibly they've been blessed with one of the greatest philosophers and political thinkers of this time, and possibly in the world, in Alexander Dugin. Yes, if the Russian people feel that they currently are being vilified by the West, I think that if he knows that Alexander Dugin has been described by Western media and the Western Empire as the most dangerous philosopher alive in the world. And I wish to ask him if whether he's aware of his Alexander Dugin influence on, because he came up with a book concerning the time that we've entering in, which we're currently in, and which we will have to enter, which is post-modernity. And he speaks about the fourth political theory. And Russia is one of the Russian people are one of the most unique civilizations and nations to have experienced all three of the political ideologies of the 20th century. The first political theory being liberalism during the 90s. They experienced its contradictions and its failure, and it was devastating. And I'm glad to see that President Putin was able to cause the Russian nation and country to recover from that horrendous period. And of course, during the, as you mentioned, the Soviet Union, which they adopted communism as ideology, but they also faced down the third, which was Nazism and fascism, and they seem to be continuing to have to confront that ideology now in the present day. And I wish to extend to him, if he is acquainted to Mr. Alexander Dugin, that he could do us a great honor to possibly invite him to do speaking engagements here, because I think his insights would be important for us as I wish to say South African, but however, as he noticed, we seem to be still trapped by the fact that we are labeled ourselves, and we're quite proud of the fact that we label ourselves with our old, being the product of conquest by the West, and name us still continue with a slave name in South Africa, and not our true and true essence and divine name, which has been lost in history and eternity. So if he could give possibly more insights of Mr. Dugin's influence on his books that he's written, and his continued work globally on trying to enlighten the world of what is actually transpiring, the confrontation that is happening, that is not just with the West, but actually liberalism, and that is possibly entering its final form, that even the United States is grappling with its own spirit and soul, and divided on where liberalism wish to take globally into a possibly abyss. And Russia has taken the first steps to a future which Jacob Zuma was president, our previous president Jacob Zuma was so earnestly trying to clutch the hand of Russian to take us to this along into this new future and into the post-modernity world, and to and not to be taken into the oblivion and abyss, which is where liberalism and the West wish to drag us. I thank you, Carl.
Thank you so much, Harold. Can you mute your mic? And I'm sure that Ambassador Rogachev will also respond to your comments about Alexander Dugin, and also enlighten us further about how we can engage on the incredible work that he does. I want to hand over to Mabotle Pabalu, who has requested the mic. And can I remind you, please, that for this part of our conversation, we primarily want to get questions and not too much input. Thank you. The mic is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, history or your good selves in Tatekal have taught us that Russia was on the side of the South Africans during the time of apartheid, unless, of course, if you were teaching us lies. But as it stands, we respect Russia for protecting its people, unlike the other country that we all know that has waged declared war against its own citizens. We are in stage 6. I'm in the dark as I'm speaking to you right now. So I just wanted the ambassador there to to tell the president and all the Russians that South Africa is standing by them. The criminal of a president who came here and said that they are not taking sides or speaking for himself and the Palapala, not for all South Africans. He was not talking to us because history has it. History taught us that Russia stood by us. And you also taught us that to be a loyal comrade, when your fella is in a situation like this, you also have to stand by him. Tell Russians and the president that we stand by Russia. My question that I had was that what is it that Russia is doing to stop the propaganda that is being spread by the NATO, by the Western countries about everything that is happening? Because we understand that everything that is happening had to happen. You should stop over explaining yourself. We understand fully and we are very thankful for the explanation. We were taught that Russians have always been very logical. They would never do anything that will hurt or harm the lives of the citizens if it was not necessary. And for that, I also respect Russia fully. I respect them for protecting their own. I just wish that South Africa was the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I see that Comrade Nkosazana Shezi has joined us. Comrade Shezi, I'm not going to let you now do the report on the Ramaphosa Must Go campaign. We'll do it at the end of this Twitter Space conversation. But I would like to give you the opportunity if there are any questions that you would like to ask of Ambassador Rogachev. The mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Comrade Carl. It's such a great honor to speak to the man coming from Russia. As the previous speaker has said, we, the natives of this land, look up to Russia and are very pleased looking into the history that she has alluded to. Maybe because Russia has contributed to our liberation, or what we would call our liberation, and carried us through into this epoch that we have. I would like to ask Ambassador, at what stage or what would be the symptoms of a government like we've seen in Ukraine, that what is being portrayed there as the Ukraine government is actually other forces that are behind the Ukraine stance and the perpetrating the resistance that we see, and the killings that are happening, as the ambassador has alluded to. Coming back to our situation, we are faced with a situation where Russia has helped us to get what we call freedom today. But really, how would we see, or what could be the symptoms of a puppet government, if I may put it that bluntly? Because we are faced with a government that seems not to be taking the mandate from the people, from its people, and the deals and the loans that are taken on the international platform, your World Bank and so forth, really tell us that our national sovereignty is being compromised. And as alluded to, the president sitting has, wreaked havoc on all the institutions that would make him account. From the public protector sending questions being removed, and the NPA, the judges being compromised with the allegations of bribery and so forth. What could be the symptoms and the remedy of a state, a captured state, and a state that does not necessarily service its people in terms of taking the mandates and championing things that will change the lives of the people, as I understand Russia to have been, if we think about the egalitarian society that was envisaged right from the Russian Revolution. And what could be our remedy in this epoch? And if I think about Josiah Kumetev coming back from Russia, he once said, "I've seen a new Jerusalem," because of the egalitarian society that Russians or the Soviet Union built out of that country. And we are definitely not going in that direction. How can we be helped in terms of Russia being our partner, even in terms of BRICS? Sure, Kabeza. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade Nkosisen Shashezi. And yes, indeed, we are not going in the direction of being a more equalitarian society. We're moving in the opposite direction because we have a president and a government, as I said in an article that was published yesterday, who are the agents of imperialism and of white monopoly capitalism. So they've been planted amongst us in our ranks in order to take us in exactly the opposite direction. And to put it bluntly, to sell us out. I am handing the mic over to Lindo Kulu, who has the Twitter handle Free Donbass.
Hi, Carl, and thank you very much for the opportunity, and Dobry din to the ambassador. Firstly, I'd like to say, I'm currently in Turkey, and previously I was in Russia, actually in St. Petersburg, studying Russian, funny enough. And part of the problem, just to show you how delinked South Africa is from BRICS and our partners, my bank cards, thanks to the Western sanctions, were basically no longer worked when I was in Russia and I had to leave. And I just don't understand why South Africa is not strengthening or allowing Union Pay or other Chinese banks to offer their services to us as citizens. But my question to the ambassador, as you've heard, we are, you might not hear it if you are watching South African media, but we are very firmly in support. We understand the Soviet Union and its history and its support for our people and our freedom. But there's two things that I'd like to find out. So the first thing is the Western banks and Russia made a big strategic error in putting $330 billion in Western institutions. And that money has been frozen, right? It's been frozen. I would call it theft. What steps is the Russian government going to take to recover these funds? And what can they do to stop these funds being used as a way to supposedly rebuild Ukraine? And if they use that funds to rebuild Ukraine, it will mostly go to Western construction firms. We all know this. The second question is, I have a heavy heart because Ukrainians and Russians are brothers and sisters. And I think anyone who understands that part of the world will know that, it is very saddening to see images of Ukrainians, whether it's propaganda or not. There are people who are dying, and many more people died in Donbass, and I'm aware of this. And there's been a war there, civil war, for about 8 years, and a lot of them were being killed by the Ukrainian government. That being said, there have been Ukrainians who have also died. And I think it's very unfortunate that the situation is going to be prolonged because it's in the Western interest to prolong it. But President Putin has been in charge of the Federation for a long time. I know that elections are coming up, and I know that this might be undiplomatic to maybe ask this question. But can he please give us some insights into the Russian Federation's political structure when it comes to succession planning? I'm very concerned that should President Putin leave, for whatever reasons, maybe he wants to retire, I am very concerned that Russia will be has not groomed enough leaders to carry on in its historic mission to firmly position Russia into the BRICS sphere of influence, and that for me is a concern. And as observers of Russia, I think that it's something that the Russian people, of course, have to grapple with. But you know, it is concerning, and I'm concerned that we are not seeing a grooming of a new generation of leaders who are hopefully within the same thinking as Putin. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I want to hand the mic over to Africa on Point. Yes, that's the Twitter handle, Africa on Point. It seems that Africa on Point, your mic is muted.
Okay.
Yes, now I
Thank
see you've unmuted it. Please proceed.
Thank you. It's the technology. Okay. Thank you very much, Comrade Carl. Okay. To the Russian ambassador. Firstly, I would like to say, we are impressed as South African. I can tell you, South African on the ground. People, when I'm referring to South African on the ground, I'm referring to South Africans that you won't see, maybe giving speeches anywhere. The masses, we are impressed about how Russia is handling this issue. And we know that for Russia to stand firm as they are, I can tell you that we are still safe. Otherwise, if these guys were the West and the United States were just maneuvering freely without Russia around, we would have been in a worse situation. So I can tell you that we are happy, and please tell President Putin that we are happy. And for me, when President Ramaphosa is giving any speech saying South Africans are not taking whatever side, whatever that, he's speaking for himself. Unfortunately, by default, he's my president, just because unfortunately, I'm a South African and the time we're in is at the helm. But he's definitely not representing me. I don't even believe in what he actually, from everything that is happening today in our state organs, the law, the judiciary, he's everything himself. He does what that man does not represent me. I don't see even a democracy with him around. And I can tell you, if ANC keeps on having him around, ANC is going down. So most of it all, thank you very much for being in this space, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to tell you that we are in support of Russia. We are behind Russia. Unfortunately, as in BRICS and in business, where we were supposed to be supporting Russia more, we're supposed to be getting oil and petrol from Russia. At this time, we're in, there's even some discounts, but because we are led by other people who are actually having some ideas and some interest, we find ourselves where we are. We even go and start loaning money in the IMF instead of going more in BRICS. Thank you. I just want to keep it short in that way. Thank you very much. Thank you, Comrade Carl.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Comrade. Can you mute your mic? I am handing over to Real Democracy. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you for the opportunity, and greetings to.
Can you try to speak a little bit louder into your mic, or perhaps if you use headphones, try to use another way, because the sound is rather soft and muffled.
All right. Sorry, Carl. I think.
There we go. Perfect.
All right. I said thanks for giving me the opportunity, and thank you to the ambassador for being here today. And you must know that I think I speak for the majority of people here, and many South Africans, to say that we stand with Russia. We understand your reasons perfectly, and we stand with Russia. Yes, you are right, Ambassador, that our media is captured, to put it in South African terms, and with a few exceptions, Independent Online, Inside Factor, that you have had a discussion with. But the rest of the crew, the propagandists and Western shills, we are familiar with your situation because of many Western analysts like the Duran, Scott Ritter, General Salenti, and even Ron Paul and Jimmy Dore. So that's where we get our news, and it's quite honest opinions that we hear from the English-speaking world. I want to bring to your notice our Cyril Ramaphosa was at the BRICS summit and promptly went off to the G7. And our foreign affairs announced very loudly that he is going to be discussing the Russia-Ukraine situation with Boris and the Germans and so forth. So I can tell you that this man has been a sellout to this country. We've discovered it like much too late, but we've discovered it now. He has let down his friends many, many times during this struggle. Even Mr. Lakota brought that up in Parliament and spoke about that. So he has a traitorous nature, and we wonder, we have plans to make citizens arrests, but to arrest the Cyril Ramaphosa in this country, I don't know who's going to do it and when we're going to do it, but it's on our agenda. I was just wondering if being a member of the BRICS and going out into Germany and speaking about the Russian situation, I don't know if it's diplomatic or what, where the President Putin would take umbrage to that and hopefully take action and save us the trouble. Carl, that's as much as I want to say. I would like to report on the charges that we brought against him on the 18th of June. There was the matter of the cattle auction to his brother-in-law that I have had a report back from the Hawks. So at the end, we could possibly give a report on that. Thanks.
If we could add your report to that of what Comrade Nkosazana Shezi is going to share with us. And for now, we concentrate on our discussion with the ambassador.
Do I have the mic? Yes.
I'm handing the mic over to Pope Smoke of Arcadia. The mic is yours.
All right, thank you, Carl, and thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
The sound is very, very poor. Can you try to change how you're speaking into this mic?
All right, can you hear me, Carl? Can you hear me clearly now?
No, we're battling to hear you. And there's an echo.
Oh, all right. Let me leave the space and come back, right?
Okay, I can hear you now. Please proceed.
All right. Thank you, Carl. And thank you, Ambassador and the fellow speakers. I have a couple of questions and a quick remark. I would like to start with the questions. I would like to know, Mr. Ambassador, when will BRICS actually be starting a military alliance? Because we need to be able to be ready to fight off NATO. We don't want to see what we saw in Libya and Belarus and all these other countries that I see the ambassador is cutting off. But Mr. Khalil will be taking the question, I guess. Like, I'd like to know if ever BRICS will be starting a military alliance very soon, so that we can be able to defend ourselves. Because right now, it will become a sitting duck, you know, and then we know the Western forces are already here. The United Nations military, the so-called peacekeepers, they are here in South Africa already. And this dangerous US military base in Botswana, and also the NATO one in Swaziland, we are not safe, you know. We are not safe. We cannot be surrounded by people who have proved for centuries now that, you know, they are not up for us, like they are not here for us. They serve their own agenda. So that's one question there. And then the other question is I wanted to know from the ambassador is that since a new countries wants to join BRICS, countries like Iran and Argentina, will they be approving them anytime soon? And also, will they be considering Cuba as well as a strategic partner from South America? You know, because we do need Cuba actually, because Cuba as well and Russia have done a lot for the liberation of the people of South Africa. Like given the contributions of Fidel Castro, you know, he has done a lot. So we do need Cuba into BRICS as a strategic partner from South America. And one quick remark that I wanted to make to the ambassador is that he must let Russia know that we in South Africa, we have drawn the line in the sand, the water, and the sky. You know, we do support Russia, and we say forward with BRICS, forward with Russia and everything. Ramaphosa, he speaks for his own handlers. You know, when he says South Africa, he refers to his white ruling elites who control him. Those are South Africa to him. You know, he also even displayed that during that Ngole cattle, what do they call it? That money laundering auction that he had there, you know. He displayed that very well. So he speaks about his friend who handles him. And then here's one thing. He went to G7 from BRICS. That is an insult. You know, you cannot mix sugar and salt. The two will never be compatible, you know, at all. We are not part of G7 as South Africa. I don't know why will you hang around with the people who oppressed you and continue to oppress you and smile with them. Ramaphosa has sold out people, like the previous speakers have said. They've sold out our people for many years during apartheid. And then even right now, even in Marikana, the mining riots as well around 96. You know, like there is a lot I can say about the man, but I rather not waste my energy because he is not even worth talking about. So far, we just need to look up for the next election and remove him. And then I hope Bangezita, you'll be running for president. I hope you'll be running for president, or maybe somebody with a clear mind, somebody like Ace or yourself, or somebody like Lindiwe Sisulu. But the campaign needs to start now, Mbangezita. You know, the campaign needs to start now. We need to remove the Western imperialists. I just wanted to just say those couple of things, Mbangezita.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I see the Russian ambassador has disappeared, but fortunately has come back. It may have been a problem that some of the participants and the questions that they have asked may not have been heard by Ambassador Rogachev, but we will proceed now to give him an opportunity to respond to some of these questions. I would have liked to give a few more people the possibility of giving us two questions, but I do not want to lose the ambassador again. Ambassador, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Niehaus. We had a beginning of load shedding here, and then everything we went off the air for a while, so I missed part of the.
Ambassador, can you perhaps try to increase the volume? I'm begging to hear.
Yes, thank you. I said that we were in a load shedding time, and so I missed part of the questions, part of the discussion. But I would like to begin responding by thanking so many people expressing their support to the Russian Federation in this situation, and also to remembering the support that the USSR provided to the liberation movements in Africa, in particular in the struggle against apartheid in Southern Africa. It is important for us, and in particular, it is also very timely for one interesting reason, and I cannot miss that opportunity to talk about that. On a number of occasions, my counterpart, Ukrainian ambassador here, Lyubov Abravitova, with support of some South African politicians, and that came quite unexpectedly and looked pretty bizarre and cynical. They reminded South African audiences that Ukraine used to be part of the USSR. So South Africans, in fact, should be grateful to Ukrainians as well as to the rest of the peoples of the former USSR. I mean, formally, this sounds right, but there is a big nuance, and it is that Ukraine, since 1991, did everything to disassociate it with this Soviet past. They began with the programs of desovietization, decommunization, and now the last years derussification. In particular, politically, they tried to distance themselves as far as possible from everything that is Soviet or was Soviet. And should I remind you that now they celebrate the victory in the Second World War, or in the Great Patriotic War for us, on the 8th of May, not on the 9th of May like the rest of the USSR, but on the 8th of May with the Westerners. Now, hundreds and thousands of objects and places, like streets, stations, and so on, were renamed. They have lost their names connected to Soviet history, like, for example, heroes and commanders of the Red Army during the Second World War, and they are renamed and now bearing the names of Nazi collaborators like Shukhevich and Bandera, and so on. So even in material sense, Ukraine has refused to pay out its old Soviet debt, its share of the Soviet debt, and Russia did it. So even in financial terms, they have distanced, they have cut all the ties with their former Soviet past, and actually they are now only remembering it in connection with this situation when they need some kind of support and recognition from the Africans. This is pretty cynical and unscrupulous, and I think I should have mentioned that. Besides that, I would like to pick it up where you, Mr. Niehaus, have left it. In particular, with regard to the, these fakes when dead bodies all of a sudden become alive again, and so on. The propaganda is striking, really. There were, I'm not in a position now to name exactly the broadcasting company that aired this footage, but on one instance, there was an alleged Russian fighter bomber that was shot by brave Ukrainian troops, and was forced to land on a highway. And everything was fine except for the two white armed men on both sides of this alleged Russian fighter bomber, who happened to be these stormtroopers from Star Wars saga. Authors simply forgot to erase these figures from the screen, so they didn't look like either Ukrainian or Russian troops. But it did just illustrate how unscrupulous this propaganda is. And nobody ever, I never heard any of the Western media, CNN, BBC, Sky News, Fox News, whatever, present any kind of excuse to their large international audience because of some of their news pieces being debunked in such a way. The latest one was actually when Kiev came up with an idea of a new style of a provocation. Well, actually, it's not new. Perhaps I'm exaggerating. I'm talking about alleged strike on a shopping mall in Kremenchuk. In reality, the mall had not been hit. Russian troops launched a high-precision strike against warehouses where American and European arms and ammunition that were located next to the building of this shopping mall. And the strikes did not impact this shopping mall, on-store shopping mall. Footage from CCTV cameras prove this. Videos shot by Ukrainian bloggers show that the blast wave did not even damage the goods that were on sale in this shopping mall. Everything remained in its places, and things were not even falling to the floor. But what happened next was that ammunition that was stored in the warehouses detonated upon impact. And it started a fire, which then spread to the shopping mall. Our military, though, say that the shopping mall was unused and it was empty. But there are different reports, and we will double check these facts. But in general, coming back to this propaganda issue, and one of the questions was, what do we do to counter it? There is relatively little we can do, actually. This propaganda effort requires a lot of resources. And we do not print money, we earn them. Besides, we do not control world media. Mostly Anglo-Saxons do. And so these media, they represent, they defend certain interests. They are doing their business in their own way. I think that the least that I can say is that this business is unscrupulous. But we just can try to bring more objective and truthful information, faithful to the facts, to the wider range of people. And we have different media, in particular in South Africa. Yes, it is the independent media holding with whom we entertain close relations, working relations. I think, I hope mutually beneficial relations. But otherwise, what else can we do? In this particular case, Mr. Niehaus helps us to spread this word of truth and then to let you to let us to provide to you this kind of alternative information. Then the question was about philosopher Dugin. I'm very much impressed how well read this gentleman, Harold, I think, is. Not so many people in Russia have heard about him or have read his works. I certainly have not read his latest works, but some 20 years ago, I spent quite some time reading his monumental, I think 800 pages or so, work on geopolitics. And yes, he writes from the positions of defending Russian national interests, how he understands them. And he is being labeled for that for decades, being a Russian fascist by Western press. I think that he is an interesting writer. He's providing very interesting insight into many things that happen now, and he describes political events as they unfold in a way as to allow people understand real intentions and real thinking, political philosophy behind the diplomatic and political actions of the West. Now, again, he does it strictly from the positions of providing for the interests of the Russian people and the Russian state. Unlike many, and I'm coming here to the next question, unlike many observers and the representatives of political elite, ruling class, academia, business people in the West, in particular in Europe, we think that situation in Ukraine can only happen when they act in the interests of some other state, the United States of America. There are, we had very interesting and long discussions about that. To sum up and to put it roughly, I can say that most of the Russian intellectuals, having spent hours and days and weeks in discussions with their Western colleagues, they become very, very disappointed with the European elites in particular. They seem to be intellectually incapable to serve the best interests of their countries. They are either corrupt or inept, or they simply think in some ways that are harmful to their national states. It is an impact of globalism. Corruption. Look, for example, at Ukrainian elites now. For some reason, they naively believed that when they will join NATO or they will join European Union, their standards of living will drastically improve. How come? Yes, there are examples like Poland, like Baltic states, who still receive huge financial support from Brussels. But Ukraine used to be a country with population over 50 million. which used to have very high industrial, scientific, and agricultural potential. And look what it is now. From political point of view, to take President Zelensky, for example, he came to power, he was elected president by almost 75% of people who voted on the basis of his electoral promises to stop the war in Donbass, to stop discrimination of the Russian-speaking population in Ukraine, and to improve relations with the Russian Federation. Those were three main pillars of his electoral campaign a few years ago. What he has achieved? He has achieved exactly the opposite. Did he of Ukrainian people? Not at all. Not at all. Quite the opposite. With this very recent NATO decision to suggest that the result of the war in Ukraine should be decided on the battlefield, he is just being pushed to continue this deadly conflict, which Ukraine is losing, and he knows that. But he is very keen to act as to please his masters in the West, and his behavior, many actually in Ukraine itself start realizing it now, that it is simply criminal vis-a-vis his own people. Actually, about people, there is yet another detail that I would like to dwell on, and it is the argument that we often hear in the media, and I actually hear from some of my from some of the people I know here in South Africa.
Ambassador,
Yeah.
my apologies to interrupt. Can you mute that I can speak? Then you can reopen your mic. There's a strong echo. Ambassador, can you try to increase the volume? The other listeners in the Twitter space are battling to hear you. Unfortunately, this is the bane of load shedding, that it always messes up our technical abilities and ability to speak. So it is a real irritation that load shedding has caused this problem. But can you try and find a way of increasing the volume on your phone? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Niehaus. It is on maximum, so I will just speak closer to the mic, and I hope that will be better. And,
it's better. Thank you, Ambassador.
Good. So I was talking about the argument that many people make, that is very widespread in the media, about the nationality of Mr. Zelensky. And this argument himself, being a Jew, is used to counter, as they say, Kremlin propaganda thesis that Ukraine is a Nazi-driven, government of Ukraine is Nazi-driven. Ukraine is a Nazi state. They say how it could be possible. Jews were suffered so much in the Second World War. It is impossible that a Jewish president moves, governs the country in this direction. And I personally think that this argument is rather naive, if not stupid. Think about it in these terms. How can nationality be a guarantee that this or that person is immune to a certain ideology? How can blood prevent somebody to belong to a certain school of thought. Mr. Zelensky has also Russian origins, and that doesn't preclude him from being Russophobic. He traveled to the front line, and he personally, publicly called Russian-speaking population of Donbass species and unhumans. And nobody saw any kind of discrepancy there. But for some reason, Jewish blood is a guarantee that he cannot be, he cannot belong, or he cannot follow Nazi ideology. I think that this is a very big simplification. And if that were the case, we could have fight Nazism through blood transfusion. Take a syringe and inject some blood from one person to another, and here you go. We have won ideological war against Nazism. I think that this is a very, very bad argument, actually. So let me go back to the issues that were raised, and in particular, there were questions about Russian political system, and I can tell you that, well, first of all, we all think that President Putin is doing right thing, and this is about 85% of Russian population, according to the polls, support his action. So at the next election, and we have direct presidential elections, I'm pretty much sure he will be re-elected. The issue of succession will be most probably deferred, but I can assure you that, of course, he's an outstanding statesman. He has a very compelling manner of speaking to people. He's very eloquent, and he is very popular, and he will remain so. But there are others who think about the same way as he does, or even who are somewhat more radical, or even much more radical than he is. So these hopes that are cherished in some circles in the West, that let's get rid of Putin, and I think that even President Biden said that somebody should kill him or something like that, of that kind. If they do so, they can face a Russian leader who is much more radical than President Putin. In these circumstances, this situation that we have found ourselves in, with all the sanctions, with all the persecution of discrimination of Russians in the Western countries, you can go to Europe now and see restaurants and bars and some other places with the signs on the doors saying, "We do not serve Russians," which is pure racism. I do not have to explain that in this audience. And it doesn't matter whether these people support special military operation in Ukraine or do not, whether they have Russian passports or not, whether they were born in Russia or they may be second generation immigrants in other countries and they used to study and work there. I mean, this is an open racial discrimination on a racial basis. So in these circumstances, there are people who are much more radical than President Putin. And the outcome for the West is can be quite unpredictable and much more somber than it is now. But the issues of succession is decided through direct elections of their direct vote on presidential candidates in our system, in our political system. And then there was an issue, was a question about finances. And you see, I'm not a big an expert on this in this area. I think that having part of the national reserves in central banks in other countries is part of the requirement of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, who make appropriate assessments and publish ratings and so on. There was a discussion for quite some time among Russian experts that that was an option for the West, if anything. Yes, and they did like that. They acted. I think I would agree with the opinion that it's simply looting. Whatever use of that money is made in the future, it is just looting. We will survive yet again, but of course, those countries, those institutions who provided for this, who carried out these acts, this policy, they will have to respond for that. We will ask for these funds to be returned, and maybe with some percentage. Economically, there are many other issues that arise, but the fact is that Western countries have renounced all the principles that they preached to the rest of the world, such as tolerance, pluralism of opinions, rule of law, respect for the private property rights, and so on and so on. Human rights, principle of non-discrimination, and so on. Everything is abandoned. Everything is left aside in order to serve certain political interests. And we think that the West has discredited itself in a very resolute manner. We think that respect and people believing in the reliability of a dollar or euro as reserve currencies is dwindling, that there is no trust to big Western banks. The businessmen will realize that it is very dangerous to do business as usual with the West, because if anything, again, any country now can be subjected to the same discriminatory economic measures. Our experts have counted more than 10,000 separate prohibitive restrictive measures that were introduced against the Russian Federation and Russian business people as well. So this can be used. I mean, of course, our Chinese friends measure it to themselves. Who is next? This is the question now. It is not whether or not such discrimination can be applied against any other state or any other nationality. The question is now who and when. So there is no trust to Western partners, unfortunately. either in political sense or business partners. I think that this episode with Russia, and historical, it's just an episode, is very revealing, and it is really an eye-opener. I would maybe I will stop there. Maybe there is one more element that I would like to touch upon, and very briefly, and these are the accusations that are now voiced against Russia, allegedly preventing exporting of grain from Ukraine, and thus fueling inflation and threatening the world with hunger. Of course, you see that all these accusations are very much exaggerated. Inflation has begun quite some time ago, and it has very little to do, if anything, with the special military operation in Ukraine. It is due to the enormous amounts of money unprovided with services or goods that were pumped into developed economies by central banks like Federal Reserve System or European central banks. When the population of these countries was in need due to the lockdowns because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We now face, and the whole world, as usually, is paying the costs of this printing money. Even during the last year, the year 2021, when U.S. economy was already on the rise, and equity and credit markets were hot red, Federal Reserve continued to buy equities and to pump money into the economy. And they kept close to zero percentage rates as a central bank. Now, these are the origins of this spiraling inflation. First of all, then of course Ukraine used to export the amount of grain which is just makes just 1% of the world consumption. With such amounts being on international markets or taken off international markets, it is impossible to produce such an effect on them, as to people in good faith start speaking about hunger threatening some developing countries. Third, and most importantly, though, is that Russia does not prevent export of grain from Ukraine. The Russian Navy does not block Ukrainian ports. Ukrainian ports are blocked because they have mined them. At the beginning of the operation in February and early in March, Ukrainians have mined them, their own ports, and they have sank a few ships in order to close entries into harbors. Now, some of these mines are off of their anchors, and they are drifting in the Black Sea, creating a real threat to commercial navigation in the whole of the Black Sea. We have said, and our president has said repeatedly on many occasions, that Russia is ready to provide safe access to these ports for ships carrying grain at the condition that Ukrainians demine their ports. And there is an understanding about that with Turkey and with the UN Secretariat, which interfered for some reason into this. The only thing that's happening now is that media, when they report that, they distort the picture completely. It's a huge distortion, and we do not prevent grain from flowing to the world market, and even more than that, Russia is looking for a bumper crop this year, and perhaps we will be ready to export some 50 million tons of grains. So again, this is a piece of propaganda, anti-Russian, and that has absolutely no basis in reality. Thank you. Perhaps I should stop there. I think I have exhausted more or less the list of questions. And thank you again for everybody for the words of support.
Thank you, Ambassador. Can you mute? For some strange reason, when the ambassador is not muted, there's a terrible echo. But thank you so much, Ambassador. I want to ask you, and I really want to indulge your patience, to please stay with us for another 25 to 30 minutes. I will make sure that it doesn't go longer than that. And at the end of that 25 minutes, I will then ask you to make whatever concluding remarks you feel are appropriate. I now want to ask 5 of those who have requested to speak to come in. I will bring you in one after the other. Can we try to be relatively short, please, so that we do not overstep this 25-minute limit that I've set before we start winding up this conversation. It is a weekday. It is 9:15 already, but obviously there's a huge interest, and I've got many people who are asking to speak. I'm now handing the mic over to Cry Our Beloved South Africa. Can you unmute your mic? There you go.
I hope all of you are good, to Carl and to the ambassador. Yes. The point that I want to make is that it's the other listener also, or the other speaker also raised the issue of why the BRICS is not forming a military alliance. And the other second most important thing is that why does the BRICS countries also want to not actually try to make their own currency end of the day? Because if you look at the BRICS countries, actually they form quarter of the world's GDP. And if you look at NATO, it's only 30 countries with only 700 million in population. And then BRICS, if you look at BRICS countries, the population is quite very high, close to about maybe a quarter of also the world's population, or to a third. I mean a third all combined together end of the day. So if you look at that end of the day, I find it very funny why BRICS will not actually get rid of the dollar and actually come up with its own currency, and therefore also make other countries come in to join. Recently, is it Argentina and Iran also have applied to actually come and join. I think also these processes need to be speeded up end of the day. Because if you look at what the West is doing, basically NATO, which actually is pushed by the USA and actually the UK against Russia end of the day, it's that they will try to destroy Russian economy by any means end of the day, because these sanctions are not actually going to help anybody, because they're basically also affecting the Europeans end of the day. And again, the most important part that also we need to look at is that if I learn from history is that there was never a language called Ukrainian language. Actually, all those Ukrainian people are actually Russians, and Ukraine, whatever Ukraine language they call it, actually was a Russian dialect. end of the day. So basically they are Russians. It's only that when the West came into Ukraine after the dissolution of the USSR, or even towards the dissolution of the USSR, is that Ukraine formed 40% of the Russian economy. Most of the industries in Russia were actually in Ukraine. So therefore, EU and the United States were so happy actually to get Ukraine out of Russia, because they knew that Ukraine formed part of the most industrial sector of the Russian economy. Even though they did that when Russia came in, and then everything later on after the dissolution of USSR, and then there was then Russia managed to get its feedback. So the reason why these Europeans are so much interested in Ukraine was because of its economic hub and the fact that it formed a strong economic hub for the Russians than before. So therefore, they wanted to take over that economy. And given that the biggest nuclear power stations are there, and they get their energy from there and food from there, and basically, because what Europe does most of the times is that if you look at Europe, they don't produce anything. What they simply do is that they import. They don't produce most of their food, they imported, most of the minerals they imported. So they need a country. That's why they take Africa, they steal everything from Africa. Also in Ukraine, they want to use it as their hub to get their energy and everything like that. Hence, this is why they're basically sitting there. And the other most important thing that I want to ask last is that NATO is supplying arms to Ukraine. I mean, asking faithfully is NATO not already involved in the war in Ukraine, basically? Because why is Russia letting NATO get involved? Because if you supply arms to somebody to actually bomb another person, basically you are involved. Because if I get it, most of the logistics there is provided by the United States, by UK, by the Germans, and all those targets actually that they provide logistics to. Therefore, the Ukrainians use their weapons to actually attack the Russian position. So therefore, according to me, they've already declared war against Russia. NATO is already declared war against Russia, and I don't know why Russia is not retaliating. I mean, I understand they want to contain the war from spreading, but the destruction that is happening in Ukraine and the supply of arms by the West, I mean, to me, they've already declared war. So how is Russia willing to contain this behavior by NATO end of the day? Thank you.
Thank you. And I think your comment at the end of your contribution with regards to the involvement of NATO in the war in Ukraine is absolutely apt. There's conclusive evidence of how weapons are consistently provided to Ukraine, and that Poland, for example, has become either officially or unofficially a major channel of putting weapons through to the Ukrainian armed forces. So yes, NATO is definitely not in any way whatsoever playing a neutral role. It is directly involved in the war on the side of Ukraine. I now want to hand the mic over to Sudia Peta. The mic is yours.
Greetings to Comrade Carl, greetings to the ambassador and to the fellow listeners and speakers of the space. I think I have only two questions, actually one question. The question is in relation to the Russian ambassador. I think in the first couple of weeks when the war started, we actually saw a lot of discrimination, specifically on the African students that were, trying to cross the border between Ukraine and Poland and other areas or close to Ukraine. But those students were actually not treated properly or not treated fairly compared to other students that or residents that were crossing the border. So I just wanted to find out his comments about the element of racism around the Ukrainian borders that we have seen. And also, I would like to, find out his comment about the current, sort of sentiments that we've seen around Spain in relation to the element also of racism against Black people or against African migrants that were actually in those countries. So I think those were the two elements that I would like to comment on. But other than that, we greatly support, the fact that Russia is standing against the bull, which is America, and also making sure that we also protected as a country in South Africa. We know that our current administration is pseudo-West puppets, and they are currently, being controlled by the puppets of America. So we, as the people, we support what President Putin and his administration are doing to protect their interest in Russia and the interest of the world. I would thank you very much, Comrade Carl, and thanks for the space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, comrade, and thanks for those comments. Melody, you've requested the mic. It is yours. Melody, can you unmute your mic? You've requested to speak. Okay, Melody is not responding. I'm giving it to Prometheus. Prometheus has requested. The mic is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Carl, for having me. And I just have two comments regarding BRICS. I won't talk about the war since most of the speakers have talked about it, and I will just be repeating myself. So I will go straight to the BRICS. As we can all see, most of the African countries, you can already see that they are slowly going away from the from Americans' influence or the influence of the West. And I would like just to get your views, Comrade Carl, and also the ambassador. What's your take on what role BRICS is going to play in the future in Africa? We can see that South Africa alone being there, you have it more or less, caught between the West and BRICS. As you can see, the president could easily fly off to Germany, to the G7. Just few days after having a meeting with the BRICS. So my question, or just to seek your comments or your view, your take on the BRICS and how what is going to be its role in Africa in the future, going in the future. We can see that the population of Africa, it's more or less for the multipolar world where we are respected, we engage in partnerships which help us to grow. As you can see, China is already building, train like railways and bridges and roads across Africa. You go to Nairobi, you can see already the trains have been built, while the West was just looting the continent basically, and just placing the burdens of loans from IMF and so on, with no much development. So I would just like to have your view about the BRICS and what role it can play, not just in South Africa, but looking at the wide the continent at large. Should the BRICS, the BRICS partners, so I'm talking about Russia, should they be championing at getting more countries from Africa on board, just to enlarge their presence on the continent and challenge the basically the West, which of course we can all see that it has no interest in developing Africa. It's only interested in creating chaos. Look at what's happening in Congo. Look what's happening in Somalia. The same day that the USA was bombing Somalia, everybody was talking about Ukraine. And what's happening in Somalia, it's horrible. And Somalia, it's a country with resources, with oil, and so on. So from where I stand, I see that there is a way that BRICS can engage the continent and bring it to a more prosperity than what's going on. So there's a challenge that some countries may be still I don't know, some presidents, maybe let me not say some countries, let's say some presidents or politicians maybe inclined more to the US as, puppets, as someone has said, but this will only hurt, the entire populations who wants to move on, who wants really progress, and who wants to engage with the world in a more prosperous way. So I would just like your view, Comrade Carl, and the ambassador, if you can comment on that. What role can Russia and BRICS play into the greater continent? Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah.
Thank you so much. I want to hand the mic over to Lusanda. Lusanda, you're the second last person who's going to get an opportunity tonight. And after that, it is going to be Baldwin Piri who's going to be given an opportunity.
Thank you, Carl. Good evening to everyone.
Lusanda, you are very, very soft. Can you try to find a way of increasing your volume?
Am I better?
A little bit. I think you need to shout. Sorry to ask you to do that.
Okay, let me try to shout. Is this better?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to say we need to not discount the role of the media in international politics. So I think for me, in order to be able to get to the people and to get your message across, you need to understand that the media is the fourth estate. They determine the agenda of the day. People depend on the media to get information. So supporting even local media, even those that aren't necessarily mainstream, like Insight Factor, for instance, could be a start. So giving voices to local media to represent what the truth is, because Western media will never say what is actually happening. So I think the main objective for now is to support local media, those that are progressive, and make sure that they tell the real stories of what is happening between Ukraine and Russia. We've seen it with Serbia as well. There's always been an agenda that is anti-progressives, and that's why I'm saying let's deliberately, intentionally support those that are trying to give an alternative voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Lusanda. And yes, of course, also support this in my Crosshairs Twitter Spaces and also the YouTube channel. It is all part of the same project that we have to find alternative platforms where we can raise our views without being censored. We have spoken, and I think we will come back to the issue again and again of a mainstream white monopoly capitalist media that are censoring us, that are controlling the narrative, that do not allow for true freedom of speech and doesn't allow us to express our views and be able to engage in a manner that is befitting what it means to have freedom of speech in our constitution. Baldwin Piri, you are the last speaker that is going to take the mic tonight. I hand over to you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, the ambassador, for coming. I just like to ask you on one question of Africa. Do you think one Africa can be good for partnership between China, Russia, and Africa? Do we see it as equal partners between us and Russia as Africa, as we are divided as you see today? That's the only question that I have tonight.
Thank you so much. You were short, so I'm tempted to allow one more speaker to come in, and I'm going to give the opportunity to Nkosingi Pile, if he's still there and he would like to take the mic. Nkosingi Pile, can you open the mic, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Kyle. Let me greet everyone and let me say all protocol observed.
Your sound is very, very bad. Perhaps you can move around or try to do something, but you're breaking up badly.
How is it now?
That is better. Stay where you are. I hope you're not standing on one leg with your arm up in the air, but stay where you are.
Hey, it's load shedding, so hey, we've got.
We are being terrorized by load shedding all the time. It is the bane of our lives. We must get rid of these people. We must get rid of Ramaphosa and of Pravin Gordhan. And of course, of that white man whose face is the face of darkness, the narrator. Please proceed. Now, I'm afraid load shedding has finally taken our last speaker out. I'm not going to take more speakers, and I once again, as always, apologize to the many participants in this Twitter space who've requested to speak who did not get the opportunity. Unfortunately, there does come a cut-off time when we need to say, now it is time to wind up, and that moment has arrived. Before I hand over to the ambassador and he opens his mic, I would like to add one more issue that I would like him to respond to, and those are the various agreements that have been reached between Russia and the West, and the agreements that had also been reached at Minsk, and how they've been broken by the West, and the manner in which we are now being told by the Western mainstream media that those regions that decided through majority democratic vote to join and move away from the Ukraine and join with Russia are constantly being attacked and are constantly being called that this is an unacceptable process which is not provided for in international law, while there are clear provisions in the Minsk agreements for that to be possible through democratic processes. Ambassador, and when I conclude with my comments before you come in, you can hear that this platform, and I promised that also when you came, is very supportive of Russia. It is a very progressive platform. And I want to be as arrogant and also as hopeful as possible to say this is probably the most positive platform that you will get in South Africa in support of Russia and in support of the cause of Russia in the Ukraine. And if President Putin is ever prepared to spend a short while with us on this platform, that time will be well invested and well spent. I'm taking my chances, but why not? Ambassador, I'm handing over to you to make your concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Niehaus.
Ambassador, can you do what you did earlier and try and increase your volume? Towards the end of your last input, your volume was very good. Can you try to do that because you're quite soft again?
I'll do my best, but again, we're on maximum here.
There you go.
And,
there you go.
Yes, there you go. All right. Let me begin again in chronological order, and I would really like to leave all the BRICS-related issues aside, except maybe for saying that in this association, we, the member states, the relevant people, experts, are working on different elements of establishing reliable payment systems and in order to have the possibility to freely trade between ourselves without use of any foreign currency. I'm very proud to tell you that also on bilaterally there is always there is also some developments. In particular, I would like to emphasize that just 2 days ago, on the 27th of June, Moscow financial markets started trading in the pair ruble and South African rand. In 2 days, they have not. There was not a single contract though, but now it is possible. So now we can carry out bilateral trade without resorting to US dollar or euro or whatever other reserve currency. There was a question about retaliating in Ukraine as apparently and obviously not only NATO actually countries assisted, but our Minister of Defense has counted 43 foreign states that provide material support to Ukraine. So really, we through Ukrainian proxy, it's not just NATO, but the whole West who is fighting Russia right now. We are aware of this. We do not have to retaliate with all our military might. This is what we think. We have enough forces on the ground. We are winning, unlike you can hear and read and see in the media, and we will prevail finally. We try to minimize losses not only on our side but also on Ukrainian side. As I said, and I went to some length trying to prove to you that Russian military are doing everything to minimize victims among civilians. But believe it or not, the primary target, at least initially, was not the Ukrainian army as such, as a whole, but only Nazi formations. They began 8 years ago as battalions, Azov, Kraken, and others, but they grew into rather numerous formations. Well, unfortunately, Ukrainians decided to have it hard way. So now they have proceeded to 6 waves of mobilization and so on. But still, it's only a fraction of the Russian army that fights there. As for students and evacuations from the areas where fighting takes place, from the very beginning, we faced very unpleasant, very unfair situations towards the people. Actually, Russian Federation has accepted 2.1 million of refugees from Ukraine. And we counted both from Donetsk and Lugansk regions and from the rest of Ukraine. Of course, we were very busy with the situation of a number of foreign students in different parts of the country, in particular in the northeast of Ukraine, in the city of Sumy. And I don't remember what kind of tertiary institution is there, but there was a number of African students studying. And though it was only 20 kilometers to the Russian border, Ukrainian authorities did not coordinate an evacuation corridor towards Russia. They started evacuating everybody to the west of the country through the whole territory of Ukraine. And it took quite some time But of course, that was a politically motivated decision. Of course, now everybody sees it very clearly. And that was not an exclusive situation. In many other instances, the same happened along the border with Russia. People, even those who were willing to go to the east and to find refuge in Russia, they were not allowed to do so. They were all channeled to the west, taken to Poland, for example. And even then, when they found themselves in Poland, we have heard of dozens of occasions when people asked to cross the Polish-Russian border and to go to Russia, and they were not allowed under the pretext that they were there with irregular papers that were enough to ask for a refugee status in Poland, but they were not able to cross without foreign international passports, some international borders. Now, that was the difficult situation that thousands of people faced. And I'm very sorry, of course, about students in particular, because they have nothing to do with that situation, but they, some of them at least, really were discriminated against, and in particular were evacuated among the last, and so on. Actually, I should deviate here and say that Russian government in particular developed a program according to which all students that were studying, all foreign students that were studying in Ukraine can go and continue their studies in Russia according to the same curriculum, more or less. So special opportunities are provided to those who would like to finish their Ukrainian studies in Russian Federation. Now, going back to discrimination, there is nothing unexpected to us in this, because Ukrainians are nationalists. Not all, of course, not all of them, but this is nationalism, is part of their official internal and foreign policy. Ultranationalists came to power, as I tried to describe already to you. They really believe that they are superior to the Russians in particular. I'm not talking about some Africans and Asians and so on. Unfortunately, this drive is supported by Ukrainian government, not openly. They try to avoid some PR impact because of that. But it is the fact of life. Their leaders openly said, beginning 2014, that they do not need Russian population in Ukraine, that they only need 15 million of politically correct Ukrainians. They are ready to sacrifice millions of people. Their military use them as human shields. We talked about that. It is very serious. This policy is not just, you know, reveals itself in talk shows or something in some kind of political debate in the parliament and so on. It is the real life policy, and they really do implement it. Now the population of Ukraine is less than 40 million, certainly less than 40 million. And they openly say Russians should go to Russia. In UN language, this is called ethnic cleansing. So there are big problems with this country. We started this special military operation in order to put an end to bombardments of Donbass by Ukraine, and also to make sure that this country and its nationalist leadership stop posing a threat to both Russia and people living in Ukraine in its southern and southeastern areas. But this special operation will continue until its goals, denazification and demilitarization, are achieved. I thank you. Let me finish there. And thank you all
Thank
for
you.
your attention. And Mr. Karl Niehaus, thank you very much for having me on your.
Thank you, Ambassador. Can you please mute, Ambassador? Ambassador, can you please mute? I will try to proceed. The ambassador said, yeah, he's muted now. Thank you, Ambassador, for a very, very extensive engagement with us. We are hugely grateful for your time. And as South Africans, we want to say to you that the vast majority of South Africans are squarely behind Russia. We understand the reasons for the special military operation. We understand how NATO has encroached on your borders and how your safety and security has been compromised. I think this Twitter space delivered to you tonight the message that we are with us, and I hope that that message will be conveyed also with and from us to the people of Russia. Russia is us, and we are Russia. We are not confused. We know our history. We know the support that the people of South Africa and the progressive forces in South Africa have received from Russia. And we know that loyalty and solidarity is of the greatest importance. You, as the people of Russia, in this cause against imperialism, have our unequivocal support. And we will continue to engage with you, and we will continue to give our support. Where our government, because of reasons that are very unfortunate, and because of those that have been planted amongst us to be agents of the West and of imperialism, fail to give the kind of support that Russia is worthy of, and the history of support from Russia to South Africa should lead to. We apologize to you, but rest assured, Ambassador, we are busy working on setting that right. We are not going to accept us being led by agents of imperialism. We are not going to accept our historical partners and friends not being supported as they should. We, as a people of South Africa, will take matters in our own hands. We will proceed to liberate ourselves, and we will proceed to become again loyal and true friends in terms of our history and in terms of the progressive commitments that we need to make to turn this world into a just and better place. I now want to give us the opportunity to get short reports from Comrade Nkosazana Shezi and also from Real Democracy, who is requested to make a short report to us. But this must be specifically about the Ramaphosa Must Go campaigns as they are unfolding. And after that, I will make the concluding remarks for this Twitter space to end. Comrade Shezi, I'm handing over first to you. Comrade Shezi, are you still there? If you are, can you unmute your mic so that you can speak? It seems that there's a problem for Comrade Chezi. If Real Democracy is still online, can you please?
Hi, Comrade Carl.
Comrade Chezi, you finally came back.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you
you
very
can
much.
speak.
Yes, thank you, Comrade Carl. Well, I hope, sorry, I just got cut off with the call, but I hope we're on the session where we report back on our campaign. The hashtag.
Yes, I was saying that you will give a short report about Ramaphosa Must Go campaign in KZN. We will keep it short. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. No, we are mobilizing the different sectors. We have already a bigger march that is planned for the 18th of July. Initially, the organizers are Umkhonto Wesizwe Military Veterans Association. On the 1st, we'll have the stakeholders meeting. I would not really publicize the venue here, but comrades can communicate with me for further information on that one. But we are also planning on a walk from Kwamashu to Durban Central Police, which is a walk of about 10 kilometers. That would be communicated as well. We will be sharing a poster, and we are pleading with comrades to share that information as soon as we make it public. We are also as part of the serial of the Ramaphosa Must Go, lobbying different churches through the bishops around the city of Durban. So we will definitely have a bigger campaign coming up in the short space of time.
Thank you, Comrade Chezi.
So sorry, just before I go, the Real Democracy Comrade Sirini also wanted to share that I was also phoned because we went to Durban Central Police Station to open cases against Ramaphosa. The case of GBV, gender-based violence, as well as the case of alleged corruption, where Angola bulls were sold for 4.7 million, of which we believe that's not the value of the Angola, because it was done by Patrice Motsepe, somebody representing Patrice Motsepe, who's in mining and energy. And of course, Ramaphosa being the president of the country, in charge of the regulations in energy sector as well as mining sector. So we suspect that that was a bribe being paid in broad daylight, and therefore the case was opened, and Colonel Mabanga of Durban Central Police Station did call both myself and Comrade Sirini to assure them that the cases would be investigated. And Comrade Sirini was provided with a number. It's not a case number, but it's some sort of a reference, because the case was going to be taken to DPCI in Limpopo. That's the feedback from the Comrade Sirini, as well as I would like to also add that I have not yet received a case number, and we went to Durban Central Police Station with yourself, Comrade Carl. You were there immediately after the victory in Pietermaritzburg on your case. So we presented a letter of demand on which we gave the subs 24 hours to respond with a case number, or else we may take some further actions, which may include, but not limited to, reporting to the public protector. It may also include going to court to force the subs to do what ordinarily they should have done many days ago. So really the struggle continues, and we'd like to get everybody involved. If anyone, more especially in and around KZN, would like to get involved, you are free to contact me and contact Real Democracy and other comrades. Thank you, Comrade Kab.
Thank you, Comrade Chezi. Were you also reporting on behalf of Comrade Naidu of Real Democracy?
Yes,
Or
I was.
You were. Okay, that's fine. Then we take that as the report from both yourself and Comrade Naidu. Thank you for the hard work that you are putting in, and thank you for the mobilization that is going on in KwaZulu-Natal. I would like to urge those who are here in this Twitter space from the other provinces to please join in organizing campaigns in your own provinces. Remember, when we started this whole process and campaign, we said that it will have to be broad and wide. Yes, there will be coordination, but at the same time, your own initiatives are highly appreciated. And as I also said at the beginning of this long Twitter space, we will, on this coming Sunday, the 3rd of July, announce some plans also for a major mobilization and protest action that is due to take place in July. I do not want to announce the date at this stage, although we're already working towards a particular date within July to get that campaign going. And we would like, once we announce that campaign and that date, to urge everyone through the length and the breadth of South Africa to mobilize, to work, and also to make sure that from your own resources, from the little that you can give, that you contribute so that that can be truly a mass campaign that can shake this country and can shake the tree of government to the point where Ramaphosa and his acolytes and his thugs that are around him can be shaken out of the tree. We cannot continue to have this Cyril Ramaphosa as our president. We cannot continue to have the current leadership that he has surrounded himself with to be the leadership of this country. They're destroying our country. We heard tonight, and some of us shared our thoughts about it. They're destroying our international relationships. They are destroying our long-lasting friendships with those nations that have truly cared and worked for us and made sure that we as a nation become a liberated nation. I want to conclude. I've already thanked Ambassador Rogachev, and I want to thank you as the participants greatly for your participation and also for the long hours that you've put in listening and being part of this Twitter space on a weekday. On Sunday, the 3rd of July at 5 o'clock, we will have our next Twitter space. I can assure you that is going to be a blockbuster. I can't tonight announce who our very, very special guest will be, but that announcement I will be able to make probably tomorrow, but I can assure you it is going to be a very exciting Twitter space. Finally, I want to thank all of you as comrades and friends who have supported me during the year-long ordeal that I had gone through when I was totally wrongly and illegally charged, and in fact first arrested in front of the Escort prison and then charged with so-called COVID-19 regulations that have been, according to the National Prosecuting Authority, contravened. I'm sure all of you have heard that on Monday, the magistrate threw the case out of court. She made it very clear that the National Prosecuting Authority and the police had absolutely no case. And she asked the critical question, how was it possible for the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Ronald Lamola, on that same day when I was arrested while I was doing a live interview with the SABC TV, how was it possible for Minister Lamola that morning to address a large crowd in front of the Escort prison and no action whatsoever was taken against him or any of those who gathered there? Evidently, we live in a society where there's selective justice. Evidently, we live in a society where our law enforcement agencies are abused for party and factional political reasons. One can be grateful that there are still the few officers of the law, such as the magistrate who presided over my case, who had the courage to say this is nonsense and to throw it out of court. I thank all of you for the support that you have given me during this difficult time, and I thank you for your continuing to support to make sure that we as a nation will indeed liberate ourselves from all the ills that have befallen us under Cyril Ramaphosa and his thugs. With a little bit of celebration, but also with an expression of commitment to the future and to the long and hard struggle that we will still have to fight. I play out with our usual signature tune by John Coltrane, Blue Train. Good night and go well.